Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well today. We are playing some more Golgari, and life is good when we play Golgari. This deck is so fun. Been having such good results with it, and I've got my eye on the Dark Confidant builds. I will hopefully be attempting to, bring those into the channel as well, into the fold of what we show here. Right now, my budget for MTGO is just very limited. So I'm working on selling out some of my paper collection to fund some broader inclusions for the channel, including picking up some Bobs to play out that variant. And I am also on Patreon right now, so if you would like to support the channel, support some really consistent, really thorough BGX content, well, I guess just BG content, at least for now, focusing on Golgari in Modern, the link to that will be in the description below, and I would really appreciate that. So, but until then, we are on the 25 land Tasigur and Tracker build, and absolutely loving it. Now let's take a look at our opening hand. We have a pair of Blooming Marsh, and 4 of our 5 spells can be cast off of those totally painlessly. So this hand is pretty great. 2 forms of hand disruption in the opening hand is almost always strong. We've got Fatal Push if they're playing to the board. We have a threat, and we have a Liliana, which will be very, very good following up all of this interaction. Of course, provided we draw a 3rd land. So this is definitely among the stronger opening hands I have seen recently. I am very happy to keep this in a blind game 1. Our opponent likes their 7 as well, and they will start us off by playing a Godless Shrine tapped and passing the turn. So we can't read too much into that. Of course, Abs in Midrange is something that comes to mind, some kind of black-white token strategy. A lot of the decks that play Godless Shrine are doing something interactive and midrangey. So fortunately, we don't have to remain in suspense much longer, because we get to just lead off with an Inquisition. And we see a deck that appears to be black-white taxes, or perhaps more commonly called Eldrazi taxes. So they're playing cards. Well, this is a pretty much core component of any Taxes package in Modern. Leonin Arbiter combos with Ghost Quarter to turn the Ghost Quarter into a Strip Mine. So that's very good. They have these kind of hate bears with interaction stapled on them in the form of Tidehollow Sculler and Thought-Knot Seer, and they incorporate Eldrazi into this deck because Eldrazi Temple allows them to kind of accelerate on mana. They have other cards like Eldrazi Displacer and Wasteland Strangler, whose activation costs become cheaper as well with Eldrazi Temple. So this is actually a deck that has some really, really powerful progressions. They can put a decent clock on while interacting heavily. They can be really oppressive in terms of land destruction. They can cheat on mana and accelerate things out ahead of curve. They can grind well because they play cards like Flicker Wisp to blink their permanents for repeated value. And yeah, the major weakness of the deck is that their mana base is really clunky. It's basically a 3-color deck because they need colorless lands to cast some of these Eldrazi or activate their abilities, and they cannot play fetches because they play Leonin Arbiter. So if they're a 3-color deck without fetches, and they need to play these what are essentially tri-lands like Caves of Kolios, which can be painful. So it's a powerful deck. The land base is kind of a mess, which is all that really might hold it back from being tier 1. It's otherwise pretty strong. So what do we take here? Well, we obviously only have 2 choices, and Tidehollow Sculler, Leonin Arbiter, they're both good. They're both good takes, but so what happens if we take the Leonin Arbiter? Well, we don't have to worry about that anymore, but then they're going to go, land in the Tidehollow Sculler next turn, and they're probably going to take our Fatal Push. Now, if we were on the play, that would be fine, because they take our push, we play our Liliana, and edict the thing away. Or vice versa, they take our Liliana, we push it, we get her back. Everything is good. But you cannot respond to the Tidehollow Sculler ETB trigger without getting blown out. and I've explained that in another recent video, but we wouldn't have the luxury of doing that anyway. So the Sculler is going to be a little bit of a thorn in our side, and that's incentive enough, at least for a little while, that's incentive enough for me to take that away. And this also makes it almost certain that they're going to play land into Leonin Arbiter this turn, which is just fine with me, because then we get a 2-spell turn of Fatal Push into Thoughtseize. Sure enough, Leonin Arbiter, Caves of Kolios are on the field. We get to play out a Blooming Marsh. We're drawing swamps. The first one was good, the second one not so much, but our progression is shaping up to be really powerful, so I will not complain about that. So we'll lead off on the Thoughtseize. We see they have found an Eldrazi Displacer, so this is a kind of another Flicker Wisp style effect. It's a little bit beefier but less evasive than Flicker Wisp, and of course you have to invest mana to get the blink effect, but you can do it repeatedly. So it's a really nice one, but Thought-Knot Seer is just more of a problem. We can beat the Displacer a lot more easily than we can beat a Thought-Knot Seer, especially because the Displacer no longer has anything to blink. They have no other creatures in hand and no other creatures on board, and this also incentivizes them to play right along the curve, right into our Liliana. Yep, sure enough, there's the Displacer. And they drew an Aether Vial. Okay, so that lets them have a nice mana-efficient turn, but that's actually quite good for us because it's just yet another thing that's not a threat. And we are running them out of resources so efficiently this game that they're in some deep, deep trouble right here. Like, they had a really reasonable hand. They curved out well. They didn't miss a trick. You know, they didn't have a turn 1 play, really, but other than that, they've just had really mana-efficient turns with what was a really powerful progression on paper, but our interaction just lined up really, really well so far. They're going to play out the Ghost Quarter, and they're going to pass. Alright, so because we have extraneous lands in hand and because we want more information, we're going to take Liliana up first here. If they have some kind of a 1-mana creature to vial in, or otherwise some way to flash a creature in, I don't think that's particularly likely, but they may. This will get it out of their hand, and then maybe we can kill it cleanly with the Collective Brutality, and then it can no longer pressure the Liliana. And if this is some kind of a removal spell, for example, then we just get that out of their hand without exposing anything to it. I'm going to pitch the Swamp here. I just want to keep the green mana as flowing as heavily as possible for this Scavenging Ooze. And yes, it was a removal spell, so we got to really cleanly play around that Path to Exile. And yep, we get to play out the Ooze. And it might not look like it, but we are extremely far ahead at the moment. We are very, very far ahead. And they're a deck with a lot of powerful pieces, and they're not a tribal deck, so it's not like we're dealing with elves or something here where the pieces are pretty poor on their own, and they need a critical mass to be good. But the Eldrazi and Taxes deck is not like ours either, where one standalone threat can kind of carry the game on its own, like a Skooz or a Tarmogoyf, Tazig or a Tracker. All these things can carry a game from start to finish completely on their own when surrounded by interaction. The Eldrazi and Taxes deck, in my opinion, kind of falls in the middle of those two extremes where, you know, they don't need a full board for their stuff to be good, but they, you know, just having things one at a time isn't good either. They really want, like, 2 pieces working in tandem, ideally, but they don't have it. And once again, they're just going to draw and then pass. We will gobble up a Thought-Knot Seer on the end step and move to our next turn. Alrighty, so moving on, we have a bit of a blank for our turn. What do we do here? What do we do? Well, we have 2 options. Actually, we have 3 options. We can lead off on the Scavenging Ooze attack, see what they do. We can tick Liliana up because we have a pretty free pitch, with the Swamp. Or we could do something with this Collective Brutality, but I actually kind of like that the least. If nothing else, that is a inefficient way to get this last card out of their hand when we could just tick the Lily up. So you could go either way here with the activation or the Ooze. Or we could just get really frisky and drain them for 2. They didn't have a response to that, so sure. I still kind of like holding off on this Lily here, because, you know, maybe they vial something in or whatever, and we can edict it, but... Just gonna gobble up a bunch of stuff on the end step. Excuse me, in the attack step. After they've declared no blocks. And yeah, now we'll tick her up. They do have a vial play, so we kind of figured this, but... They are an Ether Vial deck. They do have a really high density of creatures. We were able to cleanly get the path out of their hand last turn. The fact that they have a Vial on 2 ticking Lily up, we probably weren't going to get this out of their hand anyway. But, you know, I suppose we could have just pitched the swamp instead, but here, this is not the biggest problem in the world, is it? We've got a Liliana that's gotten us so much value already. Now, they can attack her this turn and pressure her down to the point where she cannot edict. But that means they're going to take another hit from this 6/6 unless they have another follow-up play, which they don't. It's just a Concealed Courtyard, so a bit of a tough break for our opponent to brick on a draw there. They really needed something good. Another path probably would have been ideal, but, you know, a Flicker Wisp to reset our ooze, for instance, that could have been really nice. Alright, so we draw Field of Ruin, a bit of a brick of our own, but hey, we won't complain. Again, our progression has been really powerful. Nothing else to fuel the ooze here, so we have to settle for it being a 6/6 that has put us at 24 life. Seems okay. Liliana goes back up to 2. And now, of course, the Sculler cannot even attack, unless they have another blocker, but they're on the ropes, and yeah, they just scoop it up. I don't really know what they could have there. I guess it would have been, yeah, a Path or a Flicker Wisp, and then they kill the Liliana with a Sculler, and then they try to go from there. But we were ahead 24-6, and we have better top decks than they do on average, so they were in big trouble, even if they found an answer there. And... you know, this was an example of our interaction just lining up in a back-breaking, excruciatingly powerful way. Like, often in certain matchups, you like, oh, my discard is really good here, or my spot removal is really good here, or my planeswalkers are really good here. Against this Eldrazi and Taxes deck, all of it is really good. Hand Disruption early on is really good. Spot removal at the right times is really good. And the Planeswalkers can be very, very backbreaking because they don't go that wide. And so there's almost always a target to Edict, and sometimes they will struggle to pressure her following the Edict. And, you know, we just kind of had a little bit of everything, which is just the recipe for success against a deck like this. Now, that said, the fact that a lot of our interaction was nice and cheap was very helpful, because if we didn't have early removal and Hand Disruption, we could have, if we didn't have such high a density of these 3 CMC1 pieces of interaction, we probably would have been forced to take the Leonin Arbiter with, you know, let's say we only had 1 discard spell and no spot removal. We would have probably had to take the Arbiter so it didn't Ghost Quarter us out of the game, and then Tide Hollow Sculler gets to take a piece and stick around for a little while longer. You know, the texture of the game would be very, very different. So, definitely a little bit of a nut draw on our side of things. It petered out a bit toward the end as we got a few too many lands for our own liking. We would have liked, obviously, more gas off the top. But our opening hand was so strong that we just kind of... stripped them of resources really, really quickly. We found just one threat to take advantage of that and to put the game away. That's all we really needed. So, anyway, definitely a really shining example of how powerful our interaction can be. But let's see if we can get the deck tuned even better with the sideboard changes. Alright, my friends, how do we sideboard against black-white Eldrazi attacks? As well, as you just saw, a lot of our main deck stuff is really, really good. So I think the sideboarding protocol here is going to lean toward a conservative series of choices where we probably won't make that many changes overall. But let's take a look. So I do like engineered explosives. They do play a fair amount of 2-drops, and hitting their ether vials on 1 is live. I think this is good. This is probably a little bit better than the average matchup where they cluster around 2. Because, of course, we kind of cluster around 2 as well as far as permanents go. 2 and 3. But their 2-drops, they have a lot of incentives to play them as early as possible. The Leonin Arbiter, so they can start the land destruction train. The Tide Hollow Sculler to take a key piece out of the hand, things like this. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, is in the deck as well to start taxing. So, I'm usually less thrilled about this than average when I'm expecting to set it on 2 a lot of the time, because it's too symmetrical for my liking, but here setting it on 2 feels pretty good. Still got a nice chance of getting a 2-for-1, and it's just yet another piece of removal. Like I say often, our 1-for-1 interaction is so strong in this deck that we don't need cards like Engineered Explosives and Maelstrom Pulse to be huge, like board wipes, one-sided sweepers, 3-for-1, 4-for-1s. That can and does happen, and that's obviously amazing. We just need these to be decent, you know? If they are just yet another role player alongside the rest of our removal, even just as a 1-for-1, that is usually acceptable. And then the upsides are pretty huge for these cards, obviously, with the X-for-1 potential, and for that reason we want Pulse as well. So Pulse and Explosives come in. This Golgari Charm, you know, I assume they play a fair amount of X1s, but we didn't really see them in Game 1. I'm assuming, again, Flicker Wisp, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, some things like this. But whether they have enough of those to really justify this, I don't quite think so, especially because a regen is not that relevant. It seems like they lean on Path to Exile and perhaps Settle the Wreckage out of the sideboard as their ways to deal with creatures. Not so much cards like Fatal Push. Probably because they cannot reliably get Revolt triggers again without fetch lands. And then, of course, Destroy Target Enchantment. I don't think that does much. They might play a Worship or whatever, but that shouldn't be in against us anyway. So I'm going to say no to Golgari Charm. Also going to say no to Nile Spellbomb. They might have 1 or 2 cute things to buy back value out of the yard somehow, but they're certainly not using it enough for me to care. Fulminator Mage is a very interesting card. I'm going to put this card in the maybe board. It's very viable because, like I said, their mana base is a bit of a mess. Their mana base is the weak link of the deck. So, of course, Fulminator Mage destroying lands can set them back pretty far. And all that good stuff. Also, it's Grey Ogre mode. You know, it's 2/2 mode. Actually can tangle with some of their threats. Like, can be a pretty reasonable body against this deck. That said, again, we still kind of want to remain conservative in our sideboarding, so I don't know if they'll make the cut, but they're worth consideration. Choke does nothing here. Nissa Vital Force, this is not quite making the cut for me, because they're not going to put too many things into our graveyard. Maybe they'll be killing a few things with Wasteland Strangler is about the long and short of it. And even that's not great against us. A lot of our creatures just outsize the Strangler's ability to take down. So because they're not, even though they're a mid-range deck, they're not putting that many permanents into our yard. You know, plus they have all these land destruction effects to make her attacking the land she animates a little bit less effective. And the fact that Thalia can tax her into a 6-drop. Plus, we're being conservative with our siding. I don't think she makes the cut. However, we've got 2 absolute bombs to bring in the form of Languish, which should kill literally every creature they play. And Kalidas Trader of Get, who, of course, is really high value in these grindy creature matchups, especially when they are not realistically going to run us over, which this deck won't. Yeah, these 2 cards are absolute bombs. Collective Brutality, you know, this card's fine. It's fine, but whether we want a 3rd, I don't really think so, because it just doesn't kill a lot of their Eldrazi, and that's really a problem for us, those Eldrazi sticking around. they're usually the highest priority removal targets. And the fact that Brutality is not quite up to the task of killing, Displacer or Thought-Knot Seer makes me say I don't think we want the third. We might even have to examine the two that are in there. No to Duress, it's an Ether Vial deck. There's way too many whiffs, and of course no to Surgical. That is the last thing we want to be doing here. So 4 bombs to bring in, and then we will consider Fulminator Mage as well. So what don't we like? Well, I've been siding out one land, a Blooming Marsh to be exact, in a lot of these grindy mid-range matchups. I don't think we should do it here simply because they have a very strong land destruction sub-theme, and I don't really want to go down on a land. So as nice as that is in most matchups as kind of a quote-unquote free cut, I don't think that applies here. This is a mid-range matchup, and if we're against a pure mid-range mirror like BGX, we want to take out basically all of our discard. Now here I don't think we quite want to lose it all because they have a lot of ETB value, and there's just stuff we want to play around. There's stuff we want to take away before it hits the board. We saw just how powerful our discard could be in Game 1. That said, we probably want to trim some of it away just because we want to outgrind them, and that's what the matchup will likely come down to. So I'm pretty happy cutting away at least 2 Inquisitions, maybe more discard. I'd rather leave Thoughtseize in. Again, it can hit Thought-Knot, it can hit Settle the Wreckage if they bring that in. Our life total matters, but it doesn't matter so much that I want to take Thoughtseizes out before Inquisitions. What else do we not like? Well, let's just put some maybe board cards over here. We could maybe lose the 3rd Inquisition, and up to a Thoughtseize, that might be a little too heavy on the trim. We could lose a Brutality. The card's fine, but it's probably our worst form of spot removal. Definitely our worst form of hand disruption, and the Drain is okay, but, Brutality's not at its best here. And I think we could maybe lose a Scavenging Ooze, even though it was fantastic Game 1. They might play a little bit of Grave Hate, that I don't know, and it's just kind of our worst threat. Tarmogoyf should be huge here. Tireless Tracker is amazing. Tazagar is very, very strong. Ooze is just kind of the odd man out in terms of if we have to cut one threat away. So what do we do here? And is there anything else we don't like? I just said we like all our threats. I really like our Lilianas. I think they're all spectacular here. If we can get a Liliana tribal plan going, they will really struggle to keep up with us. Tireless Tracker is so good. Pulse is amazing. Decay is great. And Trophy is quite good. They might not have that many basics. We might be able to start taxing them out of basics between Trophy and Field of Ruin with certain progressions. So, yeah, we only have 2 more cards to maybe bring in. So here's what I would do. I would say that this is Configuration A. We will lose a Skooz and I guess another Inquisition. And leave these 2 pieces in, and this is a totally fine 60. If you want to play a little bit heavier with the land destruction sub-theme, it's also perfectly viable to bring in 2 Fulminator Mage and cut these 2 away. That is, I don't know if there's a clear better or worse between those 2. I think it should probably be 2 or neither, all or nothing with that. I don't see any reason why you would do just 1. But yeah, I think this configuration is viable, and I think this one is viable as well. So let me know what you think. Eldrazi and Taxes, this is a matchup that has some gray areas for sure in terms of our decision making, but I think something like this is looking pretty solid. So yeah, let's head over to Game 2 and see how it treats us. Alright everybody, Game 2 on the draw against Eldrazi and Taxes, and our hand is sweet. There is no denying that. We have 3 lands to 4 spells, which is just what we want to see. We have a really nice piece of early interaction. We have, Collective Brutality is definitely going to have some things that can kill at least early on, so that's nice too. Liliana the Last Hope has the potential to be one of our absolute best cards in the matchup, and of course we have a threat that outsizes all of their threats. And yeah, our hand is great. The things to note about this hand is that a couple fetch lands can actually be a little bit sketchy, especially on the draw. because remember, Leonin Arbiter makes you pay 2 mana before you search your deck, so he'll shut off fetch lands, and that is definitely something to be wary of. So I'm definitely going to keep that. It's just worth noting that is the real weakness of the hand. If they have a turn 2 Arbiter, we might get shut off fetching at least for a little while, but we have answers to him. Our opponent will take a mulligan to 6 as well, and then they're going to be fine with a 6, lead off on a Shambling Vent. And we draw Engineered Explosives. Okay, that's a potentially good draw. I like that, I like that. And we're going to play out a fetch land. This lets us hold up Fatal Push, and it also lets us get at least 1 fetch land out of the way in response to a turn 2 Leonin Arbiter if they have one. They don't have one, they have Thalia, Guardian of Throbbing instead. We'll still go ahead and fetch, get an Overgrown Tomb, and back to us. We will draw a Tireless Tracker. So our hand is starting to look slightly clunky, just because we've drawn a couple mana intensive things that have kind of unbalanced our traditional 1, 2, 3, 4 curve. But hand is still looking really, really powerful. So what do we do here? Well, we could Fatal Push the Thalia. That's about all we could really do. We could also set out an Engineered Explosives. I don't know if we need to really do either. I don't know how much I care about this Thalia, and I also kind of want to sequence in such a way that I will maybe on turn 4 be able to deploy Liliana the Last Hope, tick her up to kill a Thalia. Whenever you get to play Liliana, tick her up to kill something, that is just such a swing in the balance of the game that it is hard to explain how powerful that is. So I want to try to aim for that if I can. So here, once again, respecting the possibility of Arbiter, I'm going to play out a fetch land, and I'm just going to pass. Looks like they're going to start off by attacking after they deploy a Caves of Kolios. We're fine to take the hit for 2 now, just to see what else they have. Eldrazi Displacer. Sure. That's a good one. And here, you know, this is where we could start to fall behind if we didn't have an answer, because then they're ahead on board, they're taxing us, and they're able to blink things in response to spot removal. This could get very bad for us. Fortunately, we have an answer here and now, and we're going to go ahead and push the Displacer. You could have pushed Thalia as well, but I think the Displacer is the better hit there. We can always kill Thalia with a Collective Brutality if we decide that is what's warranted. So we draw another Tasigur. That's not very good. Just again, in purely in the sense of our hand becoming a little bit clunky. So we could go Blooming Marsh, Brutality the Thalia. We could play out Engineered Explosives. Those are kind of the same options we had before. Or we could delve away the yard and play a Tasigur. Now, I kind of like that, right? Because if they path the Tasigur, then we definitely have hit our 4th land for Liliana. And we can play her through the Thalia attacks and then kill the Thalia, and that's exactly what we want to do. And if they don't path him, then of course he's just walling off their attacks, and he's just bigger than anything in their deck. And then maybe we will naturally draw a 4th land. We can play the Liliana anyway, and let her just take over the game, with Tasigur either protecting her or aggressively clocking them, forcing them to take care of 2 very powerful threats. So I think that's the play. I think we go Blooming Marsh into Tasigur. And on top of all that, even if they do have a path for him, we've got another one in hand. So, feels pretty good to me. Opponent's going to play an Ether Vial. They have to tap 2 for the Ether Vial, getting taxed by their own Thalia, and then they're going to pass. So no 4th land drop. They have to kind of take a turn off of doing anything to get that Vial down. That's pretty good for us. They're not even bluffing path or push or anything because Thalia's taxing them. So seems alright to me. We draw a Maelstrom Pulse. We really wanted a 4th land, an untapped one there. That would have been so perfect to play the Liliana, take her up, kill the Thalia, get going with Tasigur. So sadly that's not to be. And so I guess first we'll attack, see if they're interested in taking this block here. I don't see why they would be. They're still at 20, but you never know. Sure enough, they don't. Thought about playing out the Explosives, but then I'm like, you know what? Let's just be fully mana efficient. We're just going to spend a full turn killing this Thalia. Maybe they have another one. So you always have to consider that, like, did I just kind of make their hand better by killing their legendary creature? They can just play another one. At this point, that's totally fine with me. We have so much gas in hand. We just wanted to do something that turn, and that was a perfectly acceptable something. I don't think we needed to escalate aggressively either. All of our cards in hand are very powerful. We don't want to pitch anything just to spot check their hand or drain them for 2. It's just not necessary, so they'll take up the Vial. They will play a Flicker Wisp, okay? They're going to bounce a Concealed Courtyard. So this might have granted them access to Path to Exile for this turn. We draw Thoughtseize, which is a pretty good draw potentially, but again, with only 3 land, I don't think we can play it this turn. We might have to play something a little bit more immediately impactful. We are just simply never going to lose the long game here. If we hit even one more land drop, I think we have this game pretty well locked up. We just can't fall too far behind on board. That's the big risk, and get kind of taxed out of the game. So, once again, we'll start off with an attack, see if they're interested in taking a block here, or if they have some kind of removal. Okay, sure, there's the Path to Exile. This is fine with us. We finally got our 4th land. Won't be untapped this turn, but now we can just cast Liliana for her actual value without the Thalia taxing her. And this is the dream, right? On a nearly empty board, we get to deploy the Liliana, tick her up to kill a 3-drop. My goodness, that is so powerful. And then the board is totally empty. She's just there on 4, waiting to kill more things, waiting to tick up, advancing a win condition. And they play a Concealed Courtyard, which cannot be good. If they had a land there, at least it could have been an untapped one, so they could pressure the Liliana with Shambling Vent and gain a couple points of life. That might not have been too bad, but as it is, all they get to do is play a land and pass. They are threatening something on 2 with Aether Vial. So we draw yet another Maelstrom Pulse. Our hand just gets more and more powerful, but still pretty clunky. That said, now is the perfect time to lead off on a Thoughtseize. If we can force something out of their hand this way, then we can deal with it. And they're not even going to let us see. They're just going to scoop it up. So that is the power of Liliana the Last Hope. We didn't even need to deploy another threat. They're just too far behind, given our cards in hand and given the fact that we have a Liliana. She is going to continue taking up, killing weenies if they have them, or in general just advancing a win condition. Like, they're not going to beat her ultimate, that is for sure. That they're just not a deck that can handle an endless stream of zombies. They can't handle it any better than we can. In fact, they're worse at it. At least we could maybe clear the way with a Maelstrom Pulse and then Alpha Strike them with a couple big things and end the game that way. But they're just going to get buried by the ult and by our value. Definitely an example of how Liliana the Last Hope, even though she didn't really do that much, like she just came down, killed a Flicker Wisp, and then passed, but this card, like, if it gets to kill something, if it gets to tick up and kill something, and the opponent is already on the back foot, oftentimes that's just basically game. I harp on this a lot, but I simply don't think a lot of people realize just how powerful that can be. And therefore, I am thrilled to finally be on 2 in the main deck. And yeah, I have to say she's one of the most impressive and one of my most favored cards in the deck, that is for sure. But once again, we just kind of did Golgari things, and we just got them. We sequenced around the Leonin Arbiter potentiality, but they didn't show us that. Fatal Push, Early Tasigur, Collective Brutality, these are all pretty stock things in our deck. And it just proved to be too much for the Eldrazi and Taxes deck to overcome. And yeah, that's pretty much how it's done in this matchup. We just want to leverage the... so we're a deck that plays really traditionally on the curve, right? We play 1-drops on turn 1, we play 2-drops on turn 2, etc. That makes us very fair and very slow in some ways by modern standards. But against a deck like Eldrazi and Taxes, where they try to, you know, maybe spend the first turn or two playing stuff like Ether Vial, playing their creature lands, and then they try to have a couple turns of critical mass where they have double spell turns and they're getting repeated ETB value, or they're blanking interaction, or they're getting ETB interaction with their hand disruption on a stick. You know, they kind of want to really snowball the game in those two turns. So against a deck like this, we actually have the faster forms of interaction for once, and we really want to leverage them. Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Inquisition, even though we trimmed the latter two down a little bit, we still like to see them early, of course. And Collective Brutality, these cards are all very powerful. And then if we're able to interact just once or twice early on, stick a big threat, stick a Planeswalker. Either Liliana is really good in that context. Oftentimes that's just going to put them in a hole that they can't really dig themselves out of. So it was a good game, and, you know, it was a good match. They definitely ended a little bit on the quicker side compared to how grindy some of these games can get, but just a couple well-timed pieces of interaction is going to really cripple a deck like that. So, a lot of the times, Eldrazi and Taxes is going to lose to decks that either are just too fast for them, or they're going to lose to their own mana base. If they get to do their thing, they're very, very powerful. So it feels good that our Golgari deck is one where they can do their thing, and we can outdo them. You know, not only can we keep up with them, we can outgrind them, we can out-interact them, and our threats can outsize theirs. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily a super favored matchup or anything, but it definitely shows the power of just the basic structure of our deck, and I love games like that. I don't like games as much where I have to lean only on one subtype of interaction, whether it be removal or discard or just clocking as fast as possible with our threats. I like games where we get to do a little bit of everything and it's all good, and that's what we got here. So fun times, good games, well played to the opponent. Not much they could have done differently as far as I can see. We just got them. So as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're continuing to enjoy the content. Please, if you are, feel free to like, share, subscribe, and visit my Patreon page. Any way you can support the channel, I would be most grateful, and I will continue to focus on this wonderful Golgari archetype. Let's make fair magic going all the way to the very top of Modern, as it rightfully should. And yeah, I'll take Thanksgiving Day off tomorrow, but more videos coming down the pipeline as always, hopefully the day after that, or at least over the weekend, if nothing else. So stay tuned to the channel, and I will see you for the next one. Have a great day.